Hi, this is Jim Musser with Upstream Ministries, and this is episode 45 of Views from Downstream. And we're talking this week about some observations that I made working with college students who had grown up in the church and in Christian homes. And I mentioned that they had uh, very little knowledge of the scriptures and how to apply them to their lives. But they also came in with this uncomfortability with praying. You could ask in a small group, ask ask people to pray, and they always or typically hesitated. And if it was a group and you just said, "Hey, whoever wants to pray can," and then I'll close this, and often very few of the students would pray. And we just learned that we were going to have to teach them how to pray. And one of the things that it seems like uh, young people misunderstand is that, and maybe adults do too as well, that praying is not for the people that you're praying around. And sometimes we get this idea that we're going to sound stupid, we're going to mess up, and what are people going to think about our prayers? And in reality, that's the wrong focus. Our focus needs to be on what's God going to think about our prayers. And I can tell you that He will like your prayers a lot more than if you just talk to Him, than if you won't because you don't really know how to exactly say what you want to say. Because God just wants to have a conversation with you. And so many times, people are just uncomfortable with prayer. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a group or within my extended family for holidays or whatever, and because I was recognized as a pastor, they would ask me to pray. And I would think, this is, if we were in somebody's home, this is your home. Why aren't you taking the responsibility for praying? Or even in the church, I spoke many times in local churches, and the elders were often uncomfortable with prayer. And I just couldn't understand that. But it's the reality. And I think it's because we've just not been exposed to prayer much growing up. And two, that we've confused prayer with a performance before other people rather than a conversation with God. And so when you are raising your kids, or as youth pastors, and you've got kids in your group, you need to engage them in praying. They just have to learn how to do that and feel comfortable with it, because there's no excuse for a young person that's been raised in a Christian home and raised in a church to suddenly after graduation be uncomfortable with prayer. And the only reason they're uncomfortable with it is because they've never really been exposed to it and been asked to do it on a regular basis. Because the more we do something on a regular basis, the more comfortable we become. So it's a red flag immediately when you find students so reluctant to pray. And so that's it's really simple. Is it we have to be comfortable ourselves with prayer, and then we have to pass that comfortability along to our kids, and just giving them opportunities to pray, you praying with them together. That's just the way to do it. And it's not hard, but it again, as I said on Wednesday, you have to be intentional about it. You have to be persistent about it. And the young kids usually, they don't have a problem with it, but the more conscious they get and self-aware, that's where that embarrassment comes in, and shyness, and you just have to persevere and work through that with your children to get them comfortable with that. But it's basically talking with God It's having a conversation. And that's what they need to understand. It's not a performance. So the other thing that I want to briefly touch on is this idea of your missional view of your life. And so many students came onto campus with no understanding at all of who they were in Christ and why they were at the university. And so a lot of that comes from, again, from parents and from church leaders not really communicating well what our lives are to be about. And too often we talk in ways that are more like the culture. Again, it's like raising kids up and they get involved in sports. And they think their life is about potentially being a professional ball player. And so parents spend thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in time, hours and hours and hours to get their kids to that point. But as I think I shared before, I know I have shared in my book, is what happens with these kids if they don't make it. And I know a parent whose child thought he was going to be a professional ball player, and he washed out. And then he didn't know what to do with his life. And we set our kids up often for spiritual failure because they don't understand that God has a purpose for them in their lives, regardless of what they do. And it doesn't matter what degree they get or what job they do. God has a purpose for them, and they need to understand that. And the main purpose is to be an ambassador for Jesus Christ, wherever they are. If they're working a job, if they're going to school, if they're in their neighborhood, they're to be a witness, an ambassador for Jesus. And that can only happen if we're teaching them that. And we're demonstrating that in our own lives, that we understand the value of our lives, that it's a missional value, that is a missional perspective on our lives. And so that, again, if the parents are exhibiting that in their daily lives, their children will pick that up. And it doesn't guarantee it's going to stick, but they will know that mom and dad are all about following Jesus. And that's how they begin to understand, oh, I've got a greater purpose than just what I do for a career or what sport I play. There's more to life than that. And so I just really encourage you to think about what's your missional view of your life. Do you have one? And are you passing that view on to your children so that when they grow up to be adults, they will have a similar view that you have? Okay, that's it for this week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.